Prosperity in Black America. What will this require? Is Black business prospering? Are we reaching women and minority-owned businesses? How do we achieve earning parity for wealth for our families? Do our children really have access to education? Will our families have choices for our children? Prison pipelines, mass incarceration, tearing our families apart. A healthcare system not accessible to the masses. The disproportionate termination of Black women from corporate America. When will we actually begin to address what's really at play? How do Black people gain more power to help make these changes? This requires a lot of political will and courage. I'm that provocateur of change. I am Cindi Bright. Welcome to Heartbeat. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Heartbeat here on Converge Media. This evening, we're happy to have you here and happy to host what's sure to be a spirited conversation tonight, as we're going to have a conversation about Black women in corporate America. We're going to talk about Black women in general, both inside of organizations, Black consultants, actually what is going on with respect to Black women and how business is treating us and termination rates and all the sorts of things that we as Black women experience and endure. Many of you know this is very personal to me, and I think a lot of you know I'm a former HR executive. So having spent 30 years inside of these major corporations and fighting for all women, I just asked the question, are all women fighting for us as Black women? We're excited tonight. I've got, my team of regular commentators who are beyond overly qualified to have this conversation with me tonight. I'm going to introduce both of them in before I introduce in our esteemed, wonderful guest that you're going to absolutely love. Let me first welcome in. She is the CEO of Jame Pay Consultant. She is Stephanie Coverson. She is a former Chief People Officer and has served inside of organizations for many years, and so very well on her way to become Dr. Coverson. So I'm just really proud to have her as a part of this team every week, where we break down a lot of these issues and talk about different issues. We also have the esteemed, out of San Francisco, California, Karen Fleshman. She is an attorney by trade, highly educated, employment law, has her own firm, Racy Conversations, and is a bold woman when it comes to fighting. She is not an ally in the performative lens. She is a woman who does stuff, is the word I'll say, the proper S word on air here. And then I want to welcome in our guest this evening, because we're excited and thrilled and actually lucky that we got her. Because her name is Aparna Rae. She is the CEO of Moving Beyond. She is in the HR analytics space, but has a wealth of knowledge and information. She's an entrepreneur. She's just done so much to help advance Black women. And so let us welcome in Aparna Rae this evening with us here. Woohoo! We are so excited to have, we all kind of know each other. So it's a nice get together for all of us to put our heads together. Aparna, I know you are in this space in a huge way, speaking out and taking on some of these issues that you see the three of us are out here fighting for every day too. Let me start with you, because, I want to hear, maybe you could just kind of give us like a lens of kind of what the last 2 years post George Floyd has been like and looked like. For Black women. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And what is data? You're a data guru. What is data saying to you about what's going on?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Gosh, what is data saying? So I think it's been interesting watching a lot of the trends around Black women's leadership and voices in the world of work over the last couple of years. Some of the things that I'm noticing is that there's this like incredible emphasis on Black women in diversity, equity, and inclusion roles, right? We are constantly hearing about Black women and other women of color taking on the work of making organizations more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable. And from a data lens, one of the things that I find interesting interesting is that there are not more practitioners who are Black now than they were pre George Floyd. About 80% of all DEI practitioners, for instance, are white folks, and they're largely white women. But the way in which media presents this is such that, you know, you think that every chief diversity officer or DEI consultant is a Black woman. I think the other thing that I've noticed, and I have really mixed feelings about it, is 5 or 6 years ago, and certainly 10 years ago, you didn't see a lot of non-Black women of color teaming up with Black women. And in the last couple of years, I've seen some really incredible partnerships between non-Black women of color and Black women, and it gives me hope. And I hope that it's not kind of a blip or a moment in time, that this is something that we're going to continue to see, because certainly in my experience as a South Asian woman who's an immigrant is very, very different than somebody who is African American or somebody who is like a Black immigrant from Africa. So I'll pause there.
Did you say, we can bring in Stephanie and Karen too as I ask this question. Did you say that non-Black women and other women of color are teaming up together, or did you say white women and Black women are teaming up together?
No, non-Black women of color, right? So
Okay.
Indigenous, South Asian, Asian, right, and Black women. The thing about white women, and I think that women like Karen are exceptions. They're not the
Yes.
norms when it comes to this work.
Yeah.
When we look at the data, and this astounds me year after year, Lean In partners with McKinsey to do a study every single year. It's called Women in the Workplace. And every single year, somewhere there is an asterisk that you follow on to a references page, and there will be one sentence that says white women are the least likely to support the leadership of any other demographic group, but in particular of women of color. But when we disaggregate that, they are the least likely to support the leadership of Black women and dark-skinned women.
And
So I don't
we
think that
should
they're collaborating. Yeah.
we should emphasize Lean In, McKinsey Studies, biggest, largest global consulting firm in the world, who are making the exact same findings that we as Black practitioners have been saying for many, many years. Karen Fleshman is an exception to the rule. It's why I am so thrilled to have her as a part of this every week, because she is Karen. Let's hear from you. I want to hear your reaction to what Aparna is saying and your observations.
Uh, wow. Well, first of all, thank you so much for hosting this show, Cindi and Stephanie. I've learned so much from you, and Aparna, thank you for being guest on this show today. You know, I just have steam coming out of my ears, because the reason why I am the way that I am is because I have been mentored, and I've followed the leadership of so many incredible Black women and non-Black women of color who, you know, gave me great feedback and were great role models, and really helped me develop into who I am today. From white women in the workplace, I had a very different experience. They perceived me as a threat to their proximity to white men in power, and really harmed me in ways that were very psychologically damaging. And I think, you know, that is why I continuously work on trying to reach my white siblings and educate us. But I have to say, um, well, I'll just stop there.
Stephanie, you and I had a conversation this morning, because you have continued to work hard in this field around trying to help progress more conversation and dialogue and action around moving the needle for Black and non-white people of color. Talk to us about I mean, I talk to Stephanie a lot, so we have these moments. Talk about like some of your observations and maybe even some of your, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but um, angst over what you have been observing and experiencing, both with some of your clients and then what you are seeing on many of the social platforms that are where people are communicating about this backlash of not of white women being the ones that have dominated the diversity space and are taking up the space from brown and black women. So let me let you talk about that.
So I'm smiling, I think, because I'm trying to avoid going on a tirade. So that is my coping mechanism. So I don't want folks to think I think this is funny. So, in short, what I am noticing among the groups of practitioners of color, particularly Black women practitioners, is apparently we are not subject matter experts in our own oppression. So, for the people that have to navigate these spaces and these barriers and make a way out of no way, apparently, we are not the subject matter experts, according to some folks, some organizations, both public, private, nonprofit. And what I am seeing disturbingly is a trend of organizations asking Black women, and other women of color, but particularly Black women practitioners, to partner up with a white practitioner to allow the medicine to go down. And so it is inherently disturbingly racist and misogynoir to even crook your lips to ask something like that for those reasons. And also, the white practitioners that I am in community with have never, ever, ever had an organization to ask them to partner up with a Black woman to give what they have to say credence and credibility. So I find that to be disturbing. I also find it to be disturbing, this idea now that we're trying to distance ourselves from race. And so diversity is all of these elements, and it is. And I think it's important for us to consider when we start splicing out, but it's it's LGBTQIA, it's age, it's disability, it's neurodiversity, all of these different things. When we parse them out in that way, the default is whiteness. And so what I mean by that is race is this great multiplier. And the darker you are in that spectrum of race, the more the oppression is magnified within those other groups. And so what I am seeing is, I would say, oh, we're done. We're done navigating and talking about racism. George Floyd was so 2020. And now we're going to look at these other elements of diversity. We're over the race. And that is absolutely problematic because, again, when we start splicing out and not taking into account race as the great multiplier, then we are centering whiteness. And when we have these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are actually centering white voices and failing to center the most impacted. And as Aparna said, I will stop there because I have a lot to say on this topic tonight.
I think we all do. Aparna, talk to us more about, because I should have dug up the graph to show it on air tonight, but I did see some statistics that came out around the chief diversity officer jobs. They were in the 90 percentile being held by white women. There were can you talk to us about some of those kind of statistics of what you're seeing, both from the chief diversity officer, even the heads of HR, and do you have any insight about the fact that these chief diversity officer jobs are continuing to report into chief human resources officers that are primarily run by white women? And so do you have a thought process or some data around what that is looking like right now?
Oh, well, so the majority of the chiefs, whether it's the diversity officers or the HR, and sometimes they're called people in culture or chief people officers, they tend to be white, right? And so I think we don't have to worry or fixate too much on who, right, like the racialized dynamic there, because they both tend to be white in the vast majority of organizations. The thing that we've seen over the last couple of years is that more companies have created specific roles, or they've opened up headcount for someone to lead diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And sometimes it does sit nestled within HR. Sometimes, though, it sits with marketing and legal. And so that's one of the things that I look for, is where does this sit? I think if your work is to make employee engagement better, then the diversity officer and the HR person, them sitting together, right, as peers, that's okay, in my opinion. But when it's sitting under legal or when it's sitting under marketing is when it gives me pause, because why do you exist, right? And you exist to make the company look better. I also think it's just worth pointing out, like, what are the backgrounds of chief diversity officers in some of the most visible companies? And they're not people with a background in adult learning. They're not people with a background, oftentimes even in human resources, which would kind of make sense. There are people that are lawyers sometimes, or engineers. And I'm just like, no offense to lawyers, but how are you improving the employee experience when your focus is on compliance, right, and risk management? But if we pull up like one more layer, right, like let's look at the macro picture, what's true in the United States, and probably we can also include Canada and like the UK, Western Europe, is we know that men and women enter the workforce in sort of equal numbers. When you look at entry-level positions, it's roughly the same, like 35 to 37% men, 35 to 37% women on a binary, which we know that gender is not on. And what we see is that the most senior leaders, well, it's 68% men and just 1.4% Black women. Even though men only represent about 30 to 35% of the population, Black women, for instance, 7% of the population, women of color at large, 20 to 22% of the overall population. Where are they? We know that they're entering the workforce, right? But they're not making it to the most senior roles. And that is a trend that honestly worries me more than some of the racialized dynamics of DEI, because it's a flash in the pan. Like, we've had other moments like this. This is a moment, and it's more important to me to see Black folks grow in their career regardless of the industry in which they work.
A couple of things that you said about that, Aparna, that I think are worth talking about further. And one, I'm just giving an opinion as a former head of HR, that when the chief diversity officers don't report into the chief executive officer, and I can make a very compelling argument about why that should be, even from just the economics of what diversity can return on profit from having decision making. I mean, these are all studies that have shown 35% financial outperformance. Like, so you have a driver. HR is a function, and I don't even think it's a necessary evil anymore. I mean, everybody knows I call for the demolishment of it, because I find it to be wasted overhead and full of these women that just want power over other people's lives. But HR is not completely contributing to profit. But diversity is a very much direct correlation to profit in a business. And we still tuck them away and not put people and give them the authority, resources, and power necessary to make these to make decisions. When you brought up the issue around, Black people excelling into these top in their careers, what we're observing now is that the people at the top in these positions, in these chief positions, are frankly not qualified to be there, and not even qualified by the very definition of what they say. They're the ones setting the definitions for qualifications, and the people that they're putting in the roles don't meet the qualifications, and they do. Am I incorrect on that, Karen and Stephanie? Are you seeing that same trend too?
Wait, who is not qualified? When you talk,
so for example, the CHRO, the woman that they put in charge of who they're using her gender as a way to check the box over diversity. But it was kind of what the point Aparna was making. I mean, her background, let's just talk about the issue we were observing on LinkedIn today, right? Like, so these are Black businesswomen, Black business people who are trying to pick up business, and the Black led businesses who are high achievers, so advanced degrees, MBAs, master's degrees, doctorate degrees, are being pushed away. And white women who come out of personal training are now coaching on women's executive leadership when they haven't even set foot inside of a corporation. Like, that's the disparity that is happening, and their feminism work that they believe is happening to help women is actually destroying brown and Black women. And they don't seem to care, they recognize it or care. Am I off base with that when I observe that?
So this is what I'll say about that. I think about Ketanji Brown Jackson in the Supreme Court nomination process, where everyone was hollering about how she was not qualified for this role. And I cannot remember which media outlet put up, I love a good graphic.
I have it. I'm sending it to the producer right now.
Yeah.
I have it.
Love a good graphic. And so holler, holler, holler about how this individual wasn't qualified. But then when you put the other Supreme Court justices, sitting Supreme Court justices in alignment with the talent, time, and treasure that she brought to the table, she was head and shoulders more qualified than the folks that were seated in, our top court of the land. So I would say that is what I'm seeing. That
let's show this graph to illustrate your point. Let's see if producer got it. Curtis, do you see what I just texted you? Okay, maybe he hasn't got it yet because it's a graphic. Okay. But it's a powerful picture, because the point that you're making is 100% valid, that criteria and how the Amy Comey Barrett is able to come in with 1/10 of the experience levels of what Ketanji Brown has. That is the exact issue that we're watching happen out here as business people and inside of organizations. Is that your point?
That is my point. And I would also add Brent Kavanaugh to the scenario as well, because again, what is in common there, I think, is this whiteness. There's a presumption of qualified when whiteness is present. And then there is a presumption of incompetence that Black and brown folks, are just getting into these leadership positions or offered a seat at the C-suite table because of their race. So what I am seeing is Black women in particular and other women of color and people of color as well have to meet the minimum qualifications, the preferred qualifications, some qualifications that the organization in question didn't know they should have as some qualifications. I'm seeing a trend of a lot of goalposts, and I'm seeing a trend of a presumption of competence based on your outward packaging.
Mm.
Your outward packaging.
I would add, look, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh went to the same high school.
Mm.
You know, Amy Coney Barrett's dad was a petroleum executive. Brett Kavanaugh's mom was a prosecutor. Neil Gorsuch's mom was on the EPA. This is led the EPA and was famous for like wearing a fur coat, and like she's a total Republican and she was completely against environmental protections. So this is such a insular group, and their main qualification is being a member of the group. And that group will like pull them through whatever. I mean, we all lived through the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation hearings.
I remember watching that on TV, and I remember seeing this white woman going ballistic in the stands, screaming and yelling. And then I was like, that's Karen. Karen was at that confirmation hearing, and I will never forget watching that, thinking, and I was like, go Karen, right? Like, because it was
it was a very, very diverse group of women, you know, from all across the country who were united during that period. And each time we went back, there were more and more of us, and they were younger and younger. But coming back to the theme of Ketanji Brown Jackson, the part of the confirmation hearing that just broke my heart the most was when Senator Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee was questioning her. And she was literally had the feel that Senator Blackburn was the plantation, you know, mistress. And Ketanji Brown Jackson was an enslaved person. That was literally how she was treating her in the confirmation hearing. And this is where we all fall apart. Like, if we cannot fix this in this generation, like, how much worse is it going to get for women? Like, literally, we are going backwards and backwards and backwards. And instead of uniting and saying, that's it, we're finally learned our lesson, we are going to be in siblinghood with each other, we continue. I'm using we for white women. White women, we continue to not learn, to not change, to not transform. Look at everything that's happening with the organization chief.
Yes. Are you guys following what's going on there? Were you going to say something, Aparna?
Well, I mean, what's going on with Chief is it's like I'm like beyond like not even interested. It's like the same thing that happened with the Wing a few years ago, right? Where you have a very expensive membership. Women of color are being denied membership or are not being taken care of and are not being given really interesting roles within the organization. But I want to go back to this idea, right? Like, why are white women not on board? And I think that you really have to understand the psyche of even the goodest person when faced with, if we're successful with respect to the work of DEI, if we are successful with the work of anti-racism, you may not have the same size of the slice of pie that you're used to, right? So, and for folks that are listening, right, that are like, I like numbers, or not emotions, and why do we have to look right now? Equal parts of men and women entering the workforce, and men by a long shot occupy the vast majority of leadership roles. That has huge economic consequence, right? And we've just watched, like, I would say, screw chief. Like, let's look at what's happening at Silicon Valley Bank. Hello, what did you do? Like, you didn't manage your assets well. So where, like, what happens, right? Like, if we're successful, of the 68% of men that currently occupy the highest roles, right? Like the CXOs, the directors, the boards, well, half of them have to go somewhere else. And that's just equality. That's not even equity. That's just equality.
These are great. I don't want to interrupt this flow, but we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we do have the graph ready to show what the qualifications tend to look like entering into these spaces. And then I want to pick back up about the white women who can't take smaller pieces of the pie because they're used to having so much. And then I also want to pick up on the white men who should be held accountable for their failures. And what are we going to do now from the banking perspective to rebuild financial institutions? Let us take a quick commercial and I'll be right back.
Half that up in Saks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah.
COVID-19 hurt my income, my health, and my family. We were about to lose our home when we heard we might be eligible for homeowner assistance funds from the government. We called 1-877-894-HOME, and a housing counselor stepped in. They talked to our lender and saved our home. Because falling on hard times does not have to mean losing your home. Federal funding details at washingtonhaf.org.
What up, y'all? T-Dub here, as always, bringing you the news in art funding and opportunities. This year's For Culture Project grants are live now, and here's what you need to know to apply. For Culture Project grants fund cultural activities and projects throughout King County. If you are an individual or group with arts, heritage, or preservation at its core, then this funding is for you. And if you're new to the grant application process, For Culture hosts virtual workshops and has a team of grant managers ready to assist you in the process. The deadline to apply is March 23rd. Head over to forculture.org for more.
Welcome back to Heartbeat. I am your host, Cindi Bright. This evening, we are having a conversation about Black women in the workplace, about standards held for Black women, about access to earning power, to power in general. And I have a great team of guests here with me, my regular show commentator, Stephanie Coverson, Karen Fleshman, and we have an esteemed guest, Aparna Rae, with us this evening, who is in this space. There's so much to unpack in all of what we're saying, and it is fun to be getting text messages during the show about people who are watching and saying this is a powerful conversation, and we need to continue to have it. So I want to pick back up. Let's first show the graphic around what you were referring to, Stephanie, earlier. So you can see, I'm going to throw on my spectacles, you can see going down the left-hand side all of the education and career highlights that Ketanji Brown has. And you can see looking across that no one else is, I think the closest person to her is Breyer. The rest of them, look over at Barrett, the far right, where barely has any qualifications. And these are the women that are getting hired into, thank you for showing that slide. These are the women that are getting hired into positions of power, and who now want to use the term shared power because they don't want to relinquish power, even though they're not qualified to be in these positions. And so let's pick back up. Stephanie, you had made a note. You wanted to bring up another point that Aparna had. So let's start with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to piggyback off of what Aparna is talking about in terms of our ability as Black women to earn money, to promote and progress. And this all goes back to the first rung, and this is back to Lean In and McKinsey's study. This broken rung. So for every 100 men promoted into management, only 58 Black women are promoted into management when Black women are interested in promoting at the same rate as men. And then while Black women comprise 7.5% roughly of the US population, we're only 1.6 and 1.4% of C-suite and vice president positions. And also, we are more likely to be penalized and experience retribution for self-promotion. So to those Lean In books and sort of the women professional coaching books, those are not for us, because those strategies backfire for us, given the misogynoir that is embedded in workplaces. And along that line, our own managers are less likely to advocate for us than our non-Black colleagues and white colleagues. And we're also the least likely to interact with C-suite level professionals in our jobs. So all of that combined together really creates a chilling effect in our desires to promote through and upward into the organizations we're in, not just because of these factors around like our managers and who we're seeing in the C-suite, but there are literally less of us to promote at each step due to that broken rung. And I think the commentary from the survey, if I remember correctly, it's going to be at least 100 years at this point to achieve representation in C-suites, right? And then we can have a whole conversation about how that impacts our families, because we're responsible for bringing in money to raise and support our families, the dollars that are available to spend in our communities, as well as our retirement. And so all of that stuff. And so when we talk about generational wealth and, as my mother used to say, you don't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of. And it's not because of our efforts. We are the most qualified and educated segment of the US population. Black women, we get bored. Next thing you know, like we're getting another master's degree or maybe for a doctorate program.
Yeah, it's true. These are very, very powerful points that you're making, Stephanie, and what Aparna had talked about, this whole broken rung. It's why, yesterday I had such the strong reaction I did about that woman who is not qualified to be a woman's coach. I mean, I literally looked at her background, and it's atrocious that they can brand themselves as women coaches and then have a convening of HR and talent people to come in and coach the women. And I had such a strong reaction to it because what she doesn't know, this is your lack of experience or her lack of education around Black women's issues, is that she's setting up a younger generation to be harmed in ways that those white women in these organizations are not. And so this is a real massive issue right now happening because the white feminism that got active, I mean, it went on in Portland, right? After the march and the women all joined hands and all women are working together. And then as soon as the march was over, the white women went and set up the LLC so that they could all make money and push the Black women aside. This, what we were talking about before the break, they're so used to having it all, and they don't know how to settle for a less piece of the pie or not having the pie, stepping aside and acknowledging that this niche is not your niche. And so the Sheryl Sandbergs of the world who want to post lean in things and tell the women while her nanny is home watching her kids on how women should behave and what women should do. Again, more sabotage to women who don't have access to it's 58 cents to the dollar and the rung is broke. Aparna, you were talking more about the piece of the pie. I want to pick back up where you were before we went on break about that topic.
Okay, so before we do that, I do want to, we just had, Women's Equal Pay Day happen a couple of weeks ago. So I want to say something about that.
Okay.
It's not that Black women are making 58 cents to a white man's dollar in any one company or in any one job, right? The way that calculation happens is they take everybody that has W-2 income and they divide it by the number of people. So for instance, they take all of the men, white men that had W-2 jobs, all the money they earned divided by the number of men that had W-2 jobs, and they arrive at a number. And so what that figure, right, and that discrepancy is an indication of is not so much that I'm getting 50 cents on the dollar in my company, but that we are making far less money as women of color. I actually shouldn't say we, because South Asian women in many industries make more than $1 for every $1 a white man earns. But Black women are not in jobs that pay well currently. 1 in 3 Black women are in frontline jobs that have very little opportunities for career advancement, but also like a significant portion of Black women are micro business owners. And the definition of a micro business owner is somebody who earns up to $150,000 a year in revenue through their business, right? So we're talking hair salons, we're talking potentially consultants, we're talking a range of folks that are never a part of the pay equity conversation because their wages are not being captured, right? It's only W-2 income. They might work in the gig economy, right? They might be freelancers. And oftentimes they're choosing that pathway because being in mainstream jobs is not great for them, right? Like they're not advancing. They are having to work not twice as hard. I would even say exponentially harder. So that's something for all of us to remember, is that the pay equity figures are really an indication of the opportunity gap, less so the income gaps in any company or industry. But back to this piece of like the slice of pie, right? There are a lot of people that I think are like pretty woo-woo, and they'll say, well, there's an infinite amount of pie. And yeah, maybe there's an infinite amount of pie, but budgets are finite. There are lots of things that are finite in our society. And when we think about, for instance, promotions in an organization, let's even take a relatively large organization that might have a few thousand employees. If we want equitable advancement, that literally means fewer white folks are going to get promoted. End of story. End of story. And that has consequences, right? Like just like there are consequences for not having opportunity, not having access, which means less wealth, right? Like by some estimates, Black folks have like average net wealth of $0 per person. and compared to like $150,000 per white American. And so what are the consequences for white folks, right? Like our society is gonna look really different. It's gonna look really different. And I think whether it's conscious or unconscious, even the goodest, most progressive white folks understand that at the end of the day, if we are successful, right? And I would even say, arguably, that our world is designed for us to not be successful in this endeavor, they don't get to have all the things they have, right? We don't, like, our only role ceases to become helpers and nannies and caregivers so that they can be successful, right? Like now they're going to be stepping into some of those careers as well, and dealing with the implications of the opportunity gap. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm not a white person, so I guess I don't really know what's happening for them all of the time. But if I was, I would be like, yeah, of course I don't want you to be successful.
So
Karen,
running that theory down, can I just ask a quick question? And Karen, I would love to hear your perspective on this. But running that theory forward, then that would mean all of the commentary about why can't we get together? Why won't you wear, the P hat with me? Wouldn't that then mean that as Black women and women of color, we are being asked to help them ascend to the throne, to sit at the table of white supremacy and dine on its goodness, as opposed to this really being an issue about girl power, women power, and collective feminism?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. I mean, Audre Lorde has a great paper that she presented explaining why women did not get the Equal Rights Amendment. And she said, white women are led to believe that if they're thin enough, pretty enough, say the right things, that they will be able to live a life of luxury and not to share power, but that it's always illusory, and that at any moment all of that can crumble in front of you. And I think that this is what is really happening in our society. The top 20% of income earners, largely white, are hoarding all of the opportunities. They're divesting from public institutions. They send their kids to private school. They have private clubs. They don't even use the public swimming pool. They don't engage in the public. They're getting further and further, and they're hoarding their wealth. They're not paying taxes. And as a result, our public institutions that are supposed to be preparing people to advance are crumbling. Our public school systems are crumbling. Our public libraries, our public transportation systems are getting worse and worse. And so we're cleaving into a two-class society where you have 20% of the people who have total excess and 80% of the people who are barely striving or barely able to survive. And the 20% are using their political power to ensure that the 80% never gets anything.
It's a very, very powerful point. In fact, I saw somebody post it today that the headlines on CNN should not be about number 45 being indicted. The conversation should be about how come the power structures have been protecting him this entire time. This mess has gone on since 2016. So we're 7 years later and he's still walking the streets. And politicians, that is, corporate America is a microcosm of America. And so the power structure still exists the exact same way in these organizations and the women, the white women who want to align themselves with the proximity to have that, will sell out anybody around them that will threaten that they can't wear their Jimmy Choos to work that day. Like, that's how vicious I've seen it play out, and what they'll do for a dollar. And it is destroying people's lives and destroying people's businesses and careers. And they don't blink an eye at it and feel entitled to believe that they are actually qualified and should have that access, and basically don't ever see themselves working for Black women. They want us to clean it all up. They want us to clean up the messes that are made, but they don't see themselves as reporting to us. And Aparna, your data point around the macro businesses, I think I shared it last week on air because I had attended this economic update because I was trying to understand what was happening here. And the statistic that they quoted was 44% of new businesses in the state of Washington are owned by Black women. And so I'm sitting there wondering, okay, and the macro businesses can barely touch any capital. You can't get capital in to help their businesses grow. So you don't have access to capital. So you go work for smaller, and you have to sell it to a much smaller audience because the Black businesses don't get support. And the choice that they have is either do that or go in and be abused, and your mental health is through the roof. And so what do we think, even hearing the number that, because I read that article too about it would take 100 years for us to ever even catch up at. And that's with people like us out here fighting every single day, trying to address things head on and call it for what it is, like trying to reveal it so that other people can see what's happening. What do you think? What do you all think we should be doing different now to try to help propel this to a different place?
I think it's time to reframe the conversation. And this is what I mean by that. So we have this group of people is underrepresented in this industry and that industry in this role. I think we need to start asking the question about why white folks are overrepresented in professions, if that's the case, because that's going to take you down an absolutely different path, right? So when we talk about underrepresentation, and at-risk youth, or sort of all of these different descriptors that we use to try to explain whatever disparities we are trying to find solutions for, it places the blame on those individuals and those communities. And so we really need to start having a conversation about why we are seeing overrepresentation in these roles, and based on that, what are the solutions?
Yes.
Very good point. Karen, what do you think?
That is so powerful. Just as Dr. Ibram Kendi has taught us that it is racism that causes racial disparities. There is a kind of racism, a discrimination that causes overrepresentation of white people. And I want to speak directly to white people who feel threatened by the demographic shift. And I have been there. I have felt that. I have felt like, wait a second, I went to XYZ college. I have XYZ qualification. I've done this. And why aren't I advancing? And why are these people of color advancing in the organization and I am unable to advance? And I felt bitter about that. And I had to really step back and look myself in the mirror and say, why am I threatened by their success? There is always something I can do. I don't have to, there's so many different options, and true equality, like real equality, requires that we step back, that we not lead everything, that we not center ourselves in everything. There is so much, like my life, I have given up a lot. Like I had to leave my husband. I got fired from my job to do the work that I do now. But what I have gotten in return, not to be totally transactional, has been so much more than what I gave up in terms of the kind of community and relationships that I have. And so we have to start to think about, like, what is our real value? What is it that we truly value? Is it material wealth? Is it power? No. What is real valuable is relationship, community, and letting go of that will open up so much more to us.
I appreciate you saying that, Karen. I think, you are talking, I almost want to say on cultural lines in terms of how different cultures are raised because, brown and black communities are, I mean, I'm saying it with a broad brush, so maybe a little unfair how I characterize it, but we're not raised with greed,
Mm,
right? Like we're raised to make sure my brother and sister can, eat. I mean, I can tell a story about going to McDonald's and we had one cheeseburger and we divided it by four to make sure all of us kids had
mm,
something like we're accustomed to making sure everybody has something. And I talk about it in my book. I actually made a comment about we're raised to be warriors because I remember my own mother, inspiring or saying things to me about what you don't have to tolerate and what you need to go out and fight for. So we are definitely warriors, and white women are raised with these tiaras on their head and the lacy skirts and the glass slipper. And so they're accustomed to having this stuff kind of being brought to them and handed to them. And they feel that that's how their lives are supposed to be. And arguably because it has been. And
mhm,
so, it is a shift in thought process around what really is valuable. I think Steve Jobs did a great job of talking about it on his deathbed when he killed himself for all these billions of dollars and he died alone. Like he talked about that. Aparna, in the last couple of minutes, I wanted to give you the floor. I mean, look, we appreciate that you've come on. All of us, we talk about this all day long. This is what we all do for a living. And so, what final thoughts would you like to leave with the audience
Mm.
about this work and your work and highlight yourself? Like, what do you want to say?
Oh, well, I'm happy to talk to anybody that loves data and wants to use it to make work better. But here's what I will say, right? Like, what's going to fix this? What's going to help us get unstuck? I really think we need broad, sweeping social welfare in the United States. I don't actually agree that white women are born with tiaras and glass slippers. The majority of the poorest Americans are white folks in rural areas, and they're living in really, really deep poverty without access to clean water, without access to broadband internet. And all of the policies that have been put into place since the 70s to dismantle access for Black and Brown folks, it's also hurt a lot of white people. And so now we're in a state of such massive polarization. We got to pay people living wages, like, an end of story. When people aren't starving, when people aren't having to make really hard decisions about whether they're going to buy food or like pay their electricity, they have the capacity to be just better citizens. They have the capacity to engage in these conversations. They're not going to have these conversations with us, right? Like, no one's engaging in anti-racism conversations unless their basic needs are met. And so I would say, like, we can put aside DEI for a moment and really focus on making sure that everybody has food, has housing, has water in what is supposedly the wealthiest nation on the planet.
Aparna Rae, thank you for well said, and thank you for being on with us. Stephanie and Karen, thank you guys both for joining me again tonight, and for all of our viewers who are watching and will be watching, thank you for joining this conversation. We will continue this dialogue, and we look forward to seeing everybody next Wednesday. So have a good evening, everybody.
Half that up in sacks, I favor black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's black. Yeah. Yeah.
Converge Media produces culturally relevant content for Black and urban audiences. Our coverage is raw, transparent, and objective, praised by community leaders, government officials, and residents. Support Converge Media today via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at Converge Media.